Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chasing the Sound. A Shot at Freedom is a book about life in Hawkins, Indiana. To most people, it's just an idyllic, well-kept American town. But for Eddie Munson, it's like living in an eternally terrifying mausoleum. Luckily, he only has a few months left to survive at Hawkins High School. And what is senior year really about, if not killing time between Dungeons & Dragons with the Hellfire Club and gigs with his band? Eddie meets Paige at the worst bar in town, who works a magical spell. She escapes Hawkins and builds a super cool life for herself working for a record producer in Los Angeles. Not only is she the definition of cool with incredible taste in music, but she may be the only person who truly appreciates him as a poet and not as the embodiment of evil. But the best part, she was offering him a chance to make something of himself, and all he needed was to get her a demo of Corroded Coffin's greatest hits. Just one recording cost money. Eddie didn't have any, but he was willing to do anything, even if it meant relying on his old man, Al Munson. His dad had just stumbled back into his life with another dubious scheme up his sleeve, but Eddie knew this was his only option to make enough money for long enough. It was a risk, but if it worked, he'd finally have a one-way ticket out of Hawkins. 1. Alice waited in the dark by the door inside the garage. An anxiousness built inside her, but it didn't have the negative tinge it usually did. She'd puzzled out an idea over the break of how she might be able to use her visions to help, and was convinced it was worth a shot. And she was excited to see her friends en masse. They had agreed it might be good to gather the night before their first post-holiday trip to the lab, so she'd hidden and watched for their headlights at the agreed-upon hour of 1100 p.m. When at last she heard the crunch of footsteps, she flipped on the lights and jumped out. Boo! There was a yelp, and Gloria entered with her hand over the heart of her perfectly pressed blouse. "Congratulations," she said. "You have successfully caused a heart attack." "Oh, come on, it was a gag." Alice nudged Gloria's shoulder. "I got you. And I taught you how to take apart a door lock." "True." Gloria laughed. Then she turned and shouted into the evening. "Alice is in a weird mood. Expect surprises." I already knew that. Ken called back. Gloria and Alice shared a roll of the eyes. "I thought having a psychic around would be more useful," Gloria said low. "He's grown on me," Alice said. Gloria nodded. "Like a very special and likable form of algae." Terry and Ken came in together. It had been 2.5 weeks since they'd all seen each other. 2.5 weeks of no van, no lab, no acid, and no electricity. Of no monsters. "You shouldn't talk about people when they're not present to defend themselves," Ken said. "Never mind that." Terry hefted high a marvelous meringue in a round tin. "I call this meeting of the fellowship to order. Also, I brought pie." "But no Andrew," Alice asked. Terry's face fell. "I can't tell him about Brenner and the draft. It would just make him worry too much about me once he's gone." "You're doing him a favor." Gloria put a gentle hand on Terry's arm, and Terry nodded. "And I'm doing you a favor." Ken carried a stack of paper plates and 4 metal forks. "I brought the means to eat the pie." Terry stage whispered. "I didn't tell him to either." Alice reached out and plucked a fork from the top plate, then dipped it straight into the pie for a bite. "Butterscotch," she said. "What is butterscotch anyway?" Ken asked. "Buttered scotch." "Heaven," Alice answered. "Brown sugar and butter usually, sometimes a little vanilla," Gloria said. And when they all gave her a look, she added, "Baking's just another form of chemistry." Alice couldn't believe it. "You contain more layers than anyone I know." Gloria Flowers. "Back at you, Alice Johnson." "Fellowship." Terry Ives' feet are tired from running the dinner shift all night. "Can we sit down?" Terry beelined to the same area they'd occupied the first time they came here. Alice had been so nervous about bringing them. She loved the shop with its grease and oil aroma and the machines that were her work. It had meant the world when no one laughed at her. They'd even seemed impressed. The bulldozer from the other week was gone back to its home. Now a granite crusher sat in its place. Terry awkwardly lowered herself to the floor beside it, depositing the pie in front of her with care. Alice thought she looked a little less worn out after the holiday. She hoped Terry and Andrew were getting lots of time together. She'd had a dream in which they got married, and one of her cousins from Canada's kid was the flower girl. Weird how it had felt like just a dream, not real, but she'd woken with a smile and then lost it immediately when she remembered that he'd be leaving any time. The calls would start going out to the first-round draftees soon. Ken placed the plates and cutlery beside the pie. Everyone grabbed a fork, even Gloria, in pants tonight, and sat cross-legged around the tin to take a bite. I wish we didn't have to go back. Gloria was the first to bring up the reason they were here. But we do. Alice swallowed. So I've been puzzling about whether there might be a way for me to use what I see to help, a way to use it to our advantage, like Terry said. I don't think any of you can access the beneath like I do, and I already told you I can't control it. At least I haven't been able to yet. Alice had a theory that she was getting better at seeing, though, and that an increase in electricity might show her more. But if I could tell you exactly what I'm seeing as I'm seeing it, so we make sure nothing gets lost in translation, maybe we could go on a real fact-finding mission. But how would we manage that? Terry asked, piling another forkful into her mouth. So you do trust that I'm seeing what I say I am? Alice knew they said they did, but she'd understand it more if they didn't. The little girl, the monsters. Terry didn't even hesitate. Yes. Why wouldn't I? Ken asked. Gloria nodded. Terry put her fork down. You have an idea how to do it, don't you? Here was the sticking point. Alice hooked her thumb in the belt loop of her coveralls. I do, but I was hoping this one. She looked at Ken. Might have a better idea. I don't think you'll like mine. Ken shook his head. I've got nothing. That's not how my gift works. How does it work? Alice demanded. She wanted to know that much, at least. Ken responded with calm, and Alice admired him more. I get feelings, sometimes fully formed thoughts, that I have a deep sense are true. Like how I felt moved to pick up a newspaper the day the ad ran about the experiment. Later I had an image of 4 people and the thought, we'll be important to each other. I can't explain it any better than that. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Alice would have to tell them her plan, such as it was. This was important to her and she'd fight for it. Do you ever get thoughts and feelings you wish you didn't? Gloria asked Ken. Yes. About any of us? Terry asked, eyes laser-focused on him. Not yet. Okay, Terry said and waved at Alice. Go on. Tell us your bad idea so we can shout it down. They really weren't going to like this, but it was the best possibility she'd come up with. The only possibility. She understood machines, and could decode the ones at the lab, too. Maybe she could create the effect she believed they needed to further unlock her mind. But if this even worked, it would require a big shock to the system. Hers. Alice heaved out a breath. It involves the electricity. You're right, I don't like it, Terry said. Go on. I don't know if there's something else to it, but I do know I only see visions. That's how I've been thinking of them. I only see them when I'm given the medicine and the shock treatment. Alice studied the pie with its massive whipped peaks, half gone now. She was afraid if she looked at the others they'd see how ridiculous she felt. The word visions made her sound like she thought she was some all-important genie or something. She didn't. No one interrupted, so she continued. If you could administer the shock, then I could do the rest. You'd be there to take notes. No way, Terry said. Too risky to you. I'm not going to shock you. This is something I can do, Alice said. I can't just live with knowing these girls may be suffering when I might be able to confirm it. It's no different than what's happening to me every week. I want to do it. Gloria held up a hand when Terry started to argue. How certain do you feel about this being worth it? There's no way for us to base it on facts, so it's all gut feelings. Some of the tension went out of Alice at the honesty of Gloria's question. I'd say roughly 85%. I can do some research, Gloria said. Find out what level of current is safe. Alice ignored that. She'd figure out how much current she needed. It puts Alice at risk, Terry said. Ken said it quietly. She's already at risk. We all are. If it cuts down on the time we have to spend there, it's worth it. Alice pleaded with Terry. You know him, right? Remember what he did to Andrew. And to you. Terry gathered her hands in her lap. We can't risk doing this at the lab. Doctor. Brenner can never find out what you can do. We know how he treats his subjects. He probably thinks your monsters are bad trips, or just enjoys making you suffer them. If he knew you'd seen him or the children, who knows what he'd do. The fact you see this stuff at all is something he would latch onto and not let go. But the lab's where the electroshock machine is, Gloria pointed out. Terry swept her eyes around them. Alice, can you make a similar machine? Can I? Alice blinked and considered. She wished she'd already taken one apart. Part of her plan had been figuring out how to run the one they had. I can make a better one. So you're thinking we'd do this here? Where will we get the drugs? I've still got the dose I palmed, Gloria said. Terry tugged on her lip. It may matter where you are when you have your visions. We should do this in Hawkins. But I thought you didn't want to be there, Gloria said. I looked at a map at the library when I couldn't find anything on Brenner. It showed open forest around the lab. If we get as close as we can outside the fence. If we're going into the woods, you'll have to make sure it works without a wired power source, Alice said. Is that a problem? Terry asked. It's a challenge, Alice said. No, an opportunity to show off. Gloria shook her head. Sounds like as good a crazy plan as any, then. You'll need a few days to research the best protocols. So when are we doing this? Terry picked up her fork. I guess as soon as Alice has the machine ready, unless someone comes up with a better idea first. We want, Ken said. A whirl of nerves spun through Alice, and they were back to being the bad kind. 2. Terry sat in a chair in a room at the lab with her eyes closed. Brenner had led her through a long series of visualization exercises, mostly picturing the various parts of her body and envisioning them healthy and strong. What purpose it had, she couldn't say, but it had been easy. Head eventually quieted and left her to go deeper. She found herself back in that nowhere-everywhere place. The void. Alone. She'd been experimenting with trying to find someone the way she'd seen Gloria. But there was nothing. No light of any kind. Anyway, even though Alice's logic that it was her choice was sound, Terry hated the idea of shocking her. She had tried to come up with a plan that meant they didn't have to. She'd come up empty. When Carly appeared in front of her, approaching in the black, Terry blinked. She was sure she'd hallucinated it. But the girl remained, darkness around them. Carly, Terry asked in her mind, holding out her hand. "I'm here," the girl said. "Am I dreaming?" Maybe, Terry offered. Who knew? I'll away, talking to Carly with Brenner in the room monitoring Terry, and none the wiser, gave the moment a special thrill. From the outside, she just sat motionless, tripping. She felt drowsy and pleasant with her eyes closed. Terry dropped her hand. She didn't want to scare Carly off, so she asked something neutral. "What have you been doing today?" Carly struck her as being in a mood. Not a good one. "Making pictures for Papa." "Like you made for me of the sunflowers?" Terry asked. Carly scowled. "No." She held up her hand, holding a crayon. Terry squinted at her forearm and saw the small tattoo there, 008. "Pictures. Those are illusions." She tried not to react with the horror she felt at the number, for Carly's sake. "Illusions?" she asked. "Oh, illusions. That's what I said." Terry might not have been around many kids, but she knew better than to argue with that tone of voice. She would tread lightly. "Does Papa know we've talked? Is it still our secret?" "I told you. Papa knows everything. There are no secrets from Papa." A circle of fear bloomed inside Terry. She tried not to let the girl see. Had she told him about sneaking out to find Terry before, or worse, had he encouraged it? Carly watched her with the attention only a child waiting for you to give something essential away could. If she asked outright again, Carly would never trust her. And now Carly didn't need to sneak out for Terry to see her. I know that seems true, but it isn't, Terry said, gazing straight into Carly's eyes so she could see her honesty. He doesn't know we're talking here. This is between us. The only way he'd know is if you told him. The girl was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll do my best. She peered at Terry with renewed interest. Do you have friends? We're friends, aren't we? Terry asked. Carly smiled, clearly pleased. I want friends more than anything. Do you have other friends? Oh yes, Terry said. Some of them are even at the lab today. When Carly looked around them in the nowhere everywhere of the void, Terry clarified. Not here, but at the lab. We all come together. And I have other friends too. Andrew, why could she barely get his name out? She'd gotten choked up. Blame the acid. The selective service and its lottery. Brenner. She was overly sentimental lately. She swallowed and forged on. Andrew's one of my very best friends. It's not fair. Carly stomped her foot in the water, and an echo of circles spun out from it into the darkness. Why do you have so many friends? You're not even special, really. Papa says he's getting me a friend, but he's said it before. The little girl was having a meltdown, and rightly so. You don't have any other friends. Why would he keep her separate if there were other children like her? God, everything she learned about Brenner made her loathe him more. Carly shook her head, her face scrunched, near tears. Well, that's not fair, Terry said. I'm glad we're friends. And you made this friend all on your own, without any help from your papa? Carly nodded. I have to go. Terry had so much more to ask her. You'll visit me again when you can. The fierce chin ducked in a yes, and then Carly threw herself at Terry and put her arms around her. The girl hugged Terry hard and fast and then released her and disappeared into the black of the void. The resilience in that little girl. How long had she been under Brenner's sway? Terry had so many questions. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, touched by the sudden hug. Children were exhausting, but also kind of wonderful. 3. Brenner sat behind an oak desk large enough to make a point. This barrier between me and you is not just symbolic. We are separated in power by many degrees. They've met with each other at the garage twice, sir, the security man said, addressing himself to a point just over Brenner's right shoulder. The trick would fooled most people into assuming eye contact. Brenner wasn't most people. And you have video or audio? The gaze over his shoulder intensified. I'm afraid we've been unable to do that. A man went in to do a sweep, attempting to sell the Johnson girls' Umbrella security system. He showed off a bit of his own. There's no way to be certain he wouldn't film us placing it. He has cameras very cleverly hidden. Brenner took his time responding. So what you've come to tell me is that a mechanic has outsmarted what is supposedly the best security and intelligence force on the planet. Not the words ID use. The man waited, and when Brenner didn't speak, he went on. But yes, if you choose to see it that way. My take is that we have decided the risk of being exposed is not equal to the value of having footage of secret meetings between college students you've been pumping full of LSD. We've managed to plant listening devices in the Ives and Flowers residences, both at the dorms and at home. That is sufficient. Get out, Brenner said. The man's mouth opened and closed, and Brenner expected an argument to spout forth. But instead the man shook his head, rose, and said, You're just like I heard. You don't know the half of it. Brenner never understood those who worried about collegial threats. He didn't care if this man liked him, didn't even truly care if he respected him. He cared about respect of his authority though. Also, Officer Brenner asked, and the man stopped at the door. You can expect to be reassigned. Our work here is of crucial importance, even if you don't understand it. Classified information is classified for a reason. I look forward to the day someone rains on your perverse parade. The man slammed the door, not waiting for a response. It hardly mattered. He wouldn't have gotten one. Of course, Brenner could have given Terry another assignment to bug the garage, but he no longer trusted her not to tell the others, and he couldn't be confident in giving her a hypnotic suggestion to forget it while she was on her guard. Time to go check in on 8, who kept giving him drawings of the two of them and a third person with a circle head and question mark face to represent the friend had promised her. He should add them to her file, but something about them made him vaguely angry. He threw them out instead. 4. Terry rolled over in bed to see Andrew staring at her. Was I drooling in my sleep? You know, I think that's adorable. Adorably disgusting. Your words. They smiled at each other. What time is it? Terry asked. Early. Terry reached over and cupped her hand to his cheek. She preferred to wait for kisses until they'd both brushed their teeth. Morning breath was not a turn-on for her. Andrew was well aware. Why are we awake then? She asked. Should we go back to sleep? Lately she could fall asleep anywhere as if on command. Did she sit down in class at the diner for a break? Did no one bother her for a few minutes? Bam. Out. She was developing a theory it was the lack of natural sunlight. Babe, Terry asked because Andrew was staring at her with his hesitation face on. Nothing. You've been talking in your sleep again. What have I been saying? I've always been a sleep talker. I believe Stacy warned you about that when she introduced us. He gave a half smile. He remembered. She did. You've been telling me not to go, in your dreams. To stay. And she was afraid she might have said something about Brenner being behind Andrew's departure. You've also been talking about Carly and Dr. Brenner. He didn't elaborate, so it couldn't be that. So she prompted. We need to talk. About the first part. Terry removed her hand from his cheek and sat up, cupping the sheet to her where normally she might have let it fall. Okay. Don't do that, Andrew said, sitting up against the headboard. Sometimes even Frodo and Sam have to have tough conversations. She could feel the tears at the backs of her eyes, waiting to spill out at the drop of a stray word from him. That couldn't happen. She had to be strong for Andrew. Her dad had always been strong for her mom strong for the rest of them, and Terry had always quietly resolved to do the same. Now's your chance, don't screw it up. I appreciate that your feet aren't as hairy as Sam's. She was amazed she kept her voice normal, level. Hit me. She memorized him, sitting in profile beside her. He turned to look at her. His brown-green eyes were so serious. His hair mussed from sleep. All right. I want to preface this by saying, I don't want this. I don't want any of this. If I could go back. If you could go back, would you really do anything differently? He took a second to consider it. Probably not. I don't want to be the kind of person who doesn't do things because they are afraid of the consequences. I know. Terry was the same. He didn't even need to explain it. Andrew smoothed the sheet beside his leg. A nervous tick. I talked to my mom. She wants me to come home before I get called up. Spend time with my folks and my grandparents. They're getting up there, and they don't understand why I'm not home since I'm not in school. You're working. Had gotten the job at the motel. But I don't need to be, not right now. I'm here for you. He stopped and took a deep breath. And that feels selfish. That's what my mom said, and it felt like she was right. Emotions and thoughts flooded Terry. She'd expected something like this at some point, if not today, but not this. Not Andrew telling her it was selfish to act as if they might not have matched her. Because they might not. Anger at his mother blazed through her. Didn't she know how in love they were? Didn't she know why they needed to be together? But she also got it. On a level she wished she didn't. If she and Becky had known their parents would never come home again when they were still so young, Terry would have done things differently. She'd have spent more nights at home instead of studying with friends or at slumber parties. She'd have proposed endless games of Scrabble and even more endless games of Monopoly. Every parent of a child eligible for Vietnam must live in that state of mind. And on paper, there was no reason for Andrew to be here. He should go home and see his family. She is right, Terry. She is, Terry said. You should go home. You mean it, he asked. But if you leave without coming back to say goodbye, I will be forced to come to Vietnam and kill you myself. Dark, he said. I love you. I'm glad we got this selfish time together. She leaned over, letting the sheet drop, morning breath be damned. And I'm glad it's not over yet, Andrew said. 5. Gloria took a seat behind her mama, who remained at her usual front counter perch. The flower shop had at last calmed down after a post-work rush. The delivery boy was out running a slew of arrangements to the funeral home. They had the place to themselves. Their house was a short walk away on West 7th, but her parents insisted they keep work and home separate. Work, therefore, had always been the best place for Gloria to bring up sensitive topics. No one argued in public, or even spoke loudly. I forgot to tell you, my glorious girl, her mamma said, rotating on her stool to half face her. That comic you asked for came in. Your dad set it back over at the gift shop. The new X-Men came in and you're just telling me. Gloria shook her head. It hadn't been selling that well, so her dad had reduced the order. The Fantastic Four and Spider-Man sold more issues for them, and those Katie Keene books. Her dad hadn't consulted her first, and she had gently demanded that he at least get her a copy. Jean Grey as the telekinetic Marvel girl was her absolute favorite character. Maybe someday there'd be a Marvel girl who looked more like Gloria, but for now she made do with Jean. You and those comics. Her mother's voice was affectionate, not judgmental. Gloria knew how lucky she was in that regard. Her parents encouraged her to follow her interests, to believe she could do or be anything. As long as she did, she'd be representing the Flowers name well. They were a central part of the community. That was important to her parents. It had always been important to her, which was why she stayed where she sat instead of running for her comic book. I've been thinking, she started. Her mamma sniffed with good humor. That's nothing new. You're always thinking. Mamma, she said, this is something serious. She turned to face Gloria then, immediately concerned. What is it, honey? I'm not saying I'm going to do this. I'm just exploring it, she said. All right, now you're worrying me. The bell over the door jingled and Mr. Jenkins rushed in. Alma, have you got a romantic bouquet by chance? I forgot our 3rd date anniversary. He was a widower, recently dating some of the single women at the church. Apparently he was not getting the hang of the demands of single life. Gloria hopped up. I'll get it. I know just the thing. She picked out a bunch of violet tulips, wrapped them in tissue paper and tied them with a ribbon. Her mother rang up Mr. Jenkins and he rushed out as quick as he'd come in. Now, her mother said, continue. Gloria had almost decided to let it go. She was certain enough how it would turn out, but she wanted some way to gauge how closely Brenner was watching them, how hard he'd push back if they tried to leave the experiment. A school in California had tried to recruit her as part of their effort to cherry-pick students of color with excellent GPAs in the sciences. Even though she had no intention of going anywhere, it felt like a safe way to get a feel for his reach. She already felt confident that Dr. Brenner was no Professor Xavier to mentor anyone, but was he the full-on villain she suspected? You know, that school on the West Coast that's been sniffing around. I've been thinking about asking for more information on what a transfer would look like. Gloria just said it. She had to give her parents a heads up because at a minimum someone in the office would know one or both of her parents and they'd end up getting a phone call. Her mother frowned. But don't you have that laboratory credit over in Hawkins again this semester? Why would you want to transfer? I'm not sure I do. That lab's not what I thought it would be. She hurried over that, not wanting to explain. I'm just looking at my options. Okay, her mother said, after a long pause. If it's what you decide you have to do, baby girl, to make your mark, then it's what you have to do. She nodded to Gloria. I can help you with getting started on the paperwork later. If I know my daughter, you've already got it at home, don't you? Gloria nodded. It had come in the dorm's mail the day before. Now go on and get your funny book. Thanks, Mama. Gloria touched her hand and went off next door to see her dad. Her mother would fill him in, soften him up on the idea if he had any protests. And she wasn't really going anywhere. Not that there wasn't a small piece of Gloria that found the prospects exciting of moving out to California to one of the schools pushing the envelope to allow women, and in particular African American women, into the sciences on a more equitable level. But she didn't want to have to leave her home to make her mark on the world. And she shouldn't have to. That was part of her fight too. This was her private form of reconnaissance. Men like Dr. Martin Brenner got you in their clutches and didn't let you go, especially if you made enemies of them. They could fight him, and they would, but they might lose. She wanted to know how hard Head worked to keep them under his thumb. She'd never expected her comic books to be training for life, but then she'd never expected to have a friend who wanted to share visions via a homemade electroshock machine. It turned out the comic books had one thing right. Having powers put you in danger. Even being near people that had powers put you in danger. And being discovered by people who wanted to control those powers put you in even more. Of that she was certain. 6. Terry eased her foot onto the brake to slow down. She'd volunteered to drive, figuring her car was the least noticeable. No one who saw it parked at the edge of the woods would question the thought it had quit and been left there while the owner went for help or a tow truck. That looks like a decent spot. Jittery Alice pointed out the front windshield to a wide gravel spot at the shoulder of the road. Beyond it, trees and darkness. But beyond that, chain link, security lights, Hawkins National Laboratory. Once Terry parked, they got out as quickly as possible, Ken and Gloria piling out of the back. They shut the doors softly. Terry unlocked the trunk. Before she could ask how best to carry the equipment, Alice had scooped it up. The irregular shape of her machine was covered by a patchwork quilt. The machine that would literally shock Alice. Flashlights, Alice asked. All for one and one for all, Ken said, and picked them out from inside the trunk. Everyone but Alice got a light. Notebook, Terry asked. And my favorite pencil, Gloria said. Ken flicked his light on. I can lead, he said, the beam cutting a path through the woods ahead. Alice, go in front of me and I'll light your way. I could carry a flashlight in my teeth, she said. Saw that in a movie once. I'll shine the light for you. Ken didn't put a question in it. Alice gave in and they started forward. Nervous, Terry asked Gloria as they followed, turning on their flashlights only when they got past the first line of trees. The branches brushed against the arms of her winter coat. Her breath fogged in the cold air. Beyond, Gloria said. Me too. Terry felt lit up by electricity herself, like she'd been struck by lightning and it coursed through her veins. Terry peered ahead past the beam of her light and saw two forms waiting. They reached Ken and a few steps past Alice. How far are we going? Ken asked. You don't know, Terry joked, but didn't give him a chance to get snippy. I'd say another 10 feet or so. She nodded up to the canopies of the trees. There's already a glow from the perimeter lights in the sky. We're close. They trekked on, the foolhardiest of fools. Terry couldn't help, as her sleeve caught on another branch and she had to pry it free, thinking of the old forest and the evil willow tree that had nearly killed the hobbits. Andrew had been right about skipping the Bombadil Goldberry section, if only she'd listened. Leading her fellowship into danger didn't seem exactly right, but where else did fellowships go but toward it? And you're not even in the lead. She spotted a slightly wider space through the trees ahead of Ken and Alice, and Whisper called, that should work. Alice heaved down her machine, then wiped her brow. The load must be heavy. Go. I mean, not good, but you know what I intend to say. Intend to say. Terry smiled in the dark at Alice. She switched her flashlight off. We should probably keep things as dark and quiet as we can. Well, leave on one light, Ken said, showing an organizational leadership side tonight that Terry hadn't expected but appreciated. He sat it on the ground so it illuminated Alice's blanket lump. She pried off the blanket around the edges. And there it sat. Terry got her first look at the contraption they were hooking Alice up to. Should I be so glad it's too dark to see it well? Terry asked. Oh, Terry, Gloria said, and her headshake was in her voice. Never insult the work of an inventor. Alice propped her hands on her hips. I tried to make it so it'll work, not so it's pretty. Terry moved closer and thought she heard Alice mutter, though I do think you're pretty. Don't listen. There was a miscellany of parts of machines joined together in a Frankensteinish way. It was beyond Terry to tease out in this dim light what the parts were and how they worked. But she recognized the low hum of a motor engine when Alice started it up. There was a slight vibration to the metal amalgamation. Let's do this, Alice said. Slow down, Ken said. You'd probably better give the acid a bit to kick in first, don't you think? Oh yeah, right, Alice said. Gloria reached into her purse, unwrapped a handkerchief, and presented the stolen acid to Alice. Alice plucked it up and popped it into her mouth. In the flashlight, her hand had trembled. Terry realized that despite her bravado, Alice was as nervous as the rest of them. Well, be right here, Terry said, and wished it didn't remind her of Brenner's words to her the first time they'd put her in the sensory deprivation tank. Stop making me more nervous, Alice said. They were in this together, though, unlike Brenner and Neon. Alice had been having electroshock for months and she was fine. Still Alice. It would be okay, and hopefully they'd learn enough to make the risk worth it. Terry prayed. Alice set to work on the machine. I'll show you what to do. She teased out some electrodes that extended from the center of the contraption. I stole these from the lab. How Terry would never cease to be amazed by her. When I was taking apart their machine to see how it works. Alice tapped a finger to each of her temples. They go here. Terry reached out to accept them and felt the plastic cold as her fingers. She had a sense of disassociation like she'd taken acid, as if she hovered above her body watching this madness. Gloria took over, lifting away the electrodes and placing them carefully on the sides of Alice's forehead. Alice walked Gloria through the steps for administering the electricity. Well, be shocking you twice at most, at a low level, for safety's sake. Gloria hesitated. How often do they do it in your sessions? That's a good question, Terry said when Alice didn't answer. She shook out the blanket and sat down, gesturing for Alice to join her. Ken would follow Gloria's directions on running the machine and take the notes. Terry would be Alice's steady hand-holding presence. Depends. You should do it twice tonight. Alice plopped down beside Terry. She reached out and dragged the blanket around both their shoulders. I already feel it working, Alice said. The trees are whispering. I say you give it 5 more minutes and then zap me. Nice terminology, Gloria said. But she checked her watch by the flashlight. In the meantime, someone tell me a story, Alice said. What about a ghost story? No way, Terry said. No ghost stories when we're in the woods with you hooked up to a car engine. Someone tell a good story. What about both? Ken asked. He stood beside the machine, but now he lowered to his knees. As long as it doesn't scare Terry, Alice said. And it's not a car engine. A burble of laughter slipped out of Alice. Can you imagine how big that would be? I did use a car battery, but I built the machine from. Story time, Ken said and lightly clapped his hands together. Terry snuggled deeper into the blanket around her and Alice. If she forgot what they were doing and why they were here, she could almost imagine this as a campout. Instead of a campfire, they gathered around a homemade electroshock machine. My aunt and uncle's house was haunted, he said. This better not be scary, Terry warned, coziness evaporating. You're not moving in there. It won't be. Ken came forward a little, the flashlight glow on his face. I'm scared. But Terry couldn't keep a straight face as she said it. I don't believe in ghosts, Gloria put in. I do. Alice. My aunt and uncle did, Ken said, because they lived with one for 50 years. Uncle Bill and Aunt Alma moved into the first house they owned in the 30s, and their ghost made himself known right off. He liked to move Alma's shoes around, downstairs to upstairs, upstairs to down. He'd hide my uncle's belts. They'd go to sleep and he'd tap 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 on the walls until Alma told him to knock it off. How'd they know it was a he? Terry asked. I don't know. A shrug in Ken's voice. They asked around the neighborhood, looked up previous owners, and couldn't figure out who it was. He was mostly a nuisance. But then Uncle Bill joined the Marines and he ended up in Korea. Alma claims it was a comfort to have someone around the house with her while he was gone. Oh, that's cute, Alice said. He came back, right? Terry tried not to watch the shadows around them. It felt like there were more of them all the time. He did. See, this is a good story. Alice dropped her side of the blanket, then picked it back up. I'm not done yet. So while my uncle was in Korea, his unit was in this giant battle for the Chosin Reservoir. Back then they used Tootsie Roll as code for mortar rounds. So they're calling for more Tootsie Rolls, not knowing if they'll get what they need to survive. 2 days later, the next parachute drop of supplies shows up and they rush to open it up and find Tootsie Rolls. Gloria scoffed. You're kidding. I am not, Ken said. Some radio operator or pilot didn't know the slang and thought they wanted candy. Alice opened her mouth and Ken rushed on. So when my uncle comes home, Tootsie Rolls become his lucky charm. He lived on the things for a week. He always has one in his pocket. Alma suggests giving one to the ghost, and so he leaves it out on the night table. No tapping that night. And in the morning the Tootsie Roll was gone. They left out one for him every night after that, and he became their helpful house ghost. Instead of hiding their shoes and belts, sometimes they'd ask him to find them and they'd poof show up. A Tootsie Rolling ghost, Terry said in wonder. I don't guess you brought any with you. Tootsie Rolls, not ghosts. I guess even my psychic powers can't predict Alice's whims. I didn't. They were quiet for a moment and Terry thought maybe someone would ask for another story. Maybe they'd keep putting this off. But it was why they were here. Time to zap me. Alice let go of the blanket again, this time shifting so she and Terry could clasp hands. You know what to do, Alice said to Gloria. I hope this works. Gloria took a lever on the machine and pulled it back. Ready. Terry looked at Alice in the dark and saw the girl nod. Ready, Terry answered for her, squeezing Alice's hands tight. Gloria hesitated, then was in motion. Terry closed her eyes and then felt Alice tense up. She made a noise and her teeth clacked together. Again, Alice said, her hands shaking. No, Terry said. One more, Gloria said. I'm sorry. Alice jerked and Terry whimpered. First the fire, then the splendor, Alice said with a slight rattle. Here we go. Gloria turned off the motor, removed the electrodes, and took up her post by a flashlight with her pencil and notebook. I'm ready, she said. Alice's eyes drifted closed. Oh, she said, it's like it's all around me. What is? Terry asked softly. The beneath. Alice released Terry's hands and gestured at the dark forest. The trees are broken, and there are webs and some kind of gummy substance growing all over them. Little spores flying through the air. A dream that's not all bad yet. A shiver passed through Terry. Can you go toward the lab? Gloria asked, and Terry could tell the reality of this was sinking in for her too. There was an undercurrent of fear in the question. Roman 2 don't know. I'm trying. This is the clearest I've ever seen. Alice snorted a laugh, seemingly untroubled, but then this was more normal for her. I'm flying. I went right over the broken down fence. So much for their security. Ken and Terry smiled at each other, shaking their heads. Keep going, Gloria said. The winter woods held few noises except the creak of the wind through bare branches. I'm still flying, Alice said after a minute. No monsters. There are some unusual cars in the parking lot. Unusual how? Alice didn't respond right away. I don't recognize the makes. Okay, keep going, Terry said. They waited, and finally Alice said, I see the lab. It's like a ghost lab, filmy but there. At a door to the lower level. A man in a security uniform went through. Good, Gloria said. So fact be the north side, Ken said, and she scribbled a note. It has keypad access from the outside. Doesn't look like many people use it, Alice said, voice dreamy. Okay, I'm inside now. Long hallway, the same tile as ours. I feel like everything is fading. I don't know how long I have. Look in the rooms, Terry said. Try to find the children. Alice nodded, eyes still closed. There are men in this room. It's a big office suite. They are working at some kind of strange machine I've never seen before, like a typewriter with a big screen attached. Lit up, a display with words. She paused. There are these little yellow pieces of paper stuck on everything. The man just put a black plastic square into the machine. Gloria scribbled. Can you read the screen? No, Alice said, it's too faint. I'm starting to lose it. Keep going, Terry said. Alice gasped. What is it? Terry asked. The girl, Alice said, upset. Jess in some kind of machine. Brenner's running it. What kind of machine? Which girl? Gloria looked up from her note-taking. It's bigger than anything I've seen. Alice scrunched her face in concentration. It's like a round tube and she's on a flat surface in the middle. Lights are going around her. Brenner just told her to hold very still. She's obviously scared. Is it 8 or 11? Gloria asked. Funny, Terry had never thought of Carly or the mystery girl that way. 11, Alice said. She moved and Brenner got mad. He's sending her away. Follow her, Terry said, and Gloria gave her a nod. Alice went quiet. I can't. I'm losing it. They're gone. Where is she going? Terry asked. Do you see any other children? I can't see any more. I don't know. I'm sorry. Alice rocked back and forth, distraught. Terry moved to comfort her, only to be interrupted by a sweep of lights from the direction of the lab. The sound of a man calling to another. Is this the right sector? That's where the light was supposedly sighted, said another. Probably just some damn kids getting high. Well, scare them straight. A glow approached through the trees. We have to go. Kill the light, Terry said low. But Gloria already had. Terry pulled Alice onto her feet. Do we take the machine? Terry asked. I can't carry it, Alice said. What's happening? Someone's coming out here, Terry said. Leave it, Alice said. If you touch the wrong place, it might still be hot enough to burn you. It won't. Ken grabbed the blanket and draped it over the machine, then picked it up with a grunt. Gloria, lead the way, he said. The voices and lights were getting louder. Terry waited for an alarm to follow, but none did. Terry held on to Alice's hand and dragged them both as carefully as she could through the trees in the darkness. Ken's steps were heavier behind them. Wait, he said low. And they paused. I thought I heard something, one of the men's voices, closer behind them, said. Terry could barely breathe. What would happen if they got caught out here? Alice bent and Terry saw her close her hand over a rock. She threw it hard to the left through the trees. It connected against something with a loud thump. The sounds of the men went that way. Gloria turned and put her free hand to her lips, telling everyone to stay quiet, and they walked out to Terry's car as quickly as possible. She managed to fit the key in the lock of the trunk for Ken and was grateful she'd left her door open. They got the machine and themselves inside, and Terry pulled onto the road just as headlights emerged from the lab's driveway. None of them spoke until it was clear they weren't being followed. We made it, Terry said, breathing hard. Barely, Gloria put in from the seat behind her. You did great, Alice. Ken beside Gloria. Alice sighed in the passenger seat. I didn't see enough. Not nearly enough. The last thing Terry wanted to do was agree. And so she said, we made it. That's what matters. She hoped it was the truth. But they were all quiet, and Terry assumed it was because they were as deflated by what felt like a defeat as she was. What had they learned that was new? It seemed like nothing. 1. Terry missed having the relative privacy of Andrew's place to retreat to, especially times like now, when she stood in the busy dorm lobby at the wall phone where she could have 10 minutes max before someone else who needed to use it gave her the stink eye. "Hello," a woman said. "Hi, Mrs. Rich." Terry shifted from foot to foot. Stress eating was making her pants too tight, so she'd worn a skirt today. The ridiculously named nylon panty legs beneath were a million times better than the girdles and garters she grew up with, but her prized pair was currently digging into her waist. That's how the patriarchy keeps women down, she thought. Uncomfortable undergarments. Is Andrew around? I'll get him for you. Andrew's mum sniffled like she had a cold, but before Terry could ask about her health, the loud drop of the receiver on the table rattled in her ear. She held the phone away for a second, then gripped it tighter, waiting. "Babe," Andrew said, moments later, his voice a low rumble. "Say something, I need to hear that voice of yours." Something. His familiar husky laugh in her ear now, and it was the best sound she'd ever heard. Terry wished they could be alone so she could tell him about the fellowship's all-for-nothing field trip. Mostly, though, she just missed him. "Your classes start today?" he asked. "Yesterday. And you have the lab tomorrow still?" "Still." She hesitated, leaning her forehead against the wall. "We probably shouldn't discuss that over the phone." "Okay." Paranoid, his voice changed, a serious note entering it even though his words were teasing. So she was almost prepared for him to say, "I have something to tell you." Terry wanted to chase the sudden solemnness away. "Let me guess, you were born on September 14th, which just happens to be the first pick of the draft lottery. Protesting the war ended up with you in the war." "Funny girl," he said. "It's about that. I got the notice to report for my physical examination. That be it then. No one was healthier than Andrew. Zero hope for some dismissal for a medical infirmity, especially because he wasn't going to fake one like the rich, privileged kids unwilling to serve their country would. Even if his country was sending him on a futile mission no one should have signed up for." "How soon?" "Next week. I wouldn't deploy immediately, but soon." Terry sighed a breath into the phone. "You remember what you promised me? Don't worry. It's been hard enough going a few weeks without seeing you." "Okay then." Terry was afraid she'd cry if she stayed on the line. Andrew didn't need that. "I better go. I've got class in 15 minutes and I see Claire White coming this way with murder eyes." Claire was always yelling into the phone at her boyfriend back home. "Love you, babe." "Love you too." Click. He hung up. She'd never felt so far from someone she wanted to be right next to her. She hung the receiver in the cradle slowly, imagining the echoing goodbye sound. Click. Being an adult about things was a total bummer. 2. Terry drove solo to the garage that night. She'd wanted to think, and driving helped with that sometimes. She left an hour early to detour on a lonely highway that was all straight lines with occasional curves, and she'd cranked up the radio loud and alternately sung and cried along to the music. An Elvis hit came on, Suspicious Minds, and though Elvis wasn't her usual favorite, she cried harder and smiled through the tears, thinking of how her mom and dad loved his music. They'd always dreamed of going to Vegas, and if they were still here they could have seen him while they were there. Who knew he'd end up there? So she belted out the lyrics about being in a trap and not being able to leave. Cathartic. She hoped she'd gotten the worst of her funk out of her system. But when she walked in to discover Ken, Gloria, and Alice already assembled, sitting in the usual floor spot, she realized the singing hadn't been cathartic enough for that. Emotions roiled through her, and a stray tear rolled down her cheek. Gloria noticed her first and got up to meet her. "What is it? Are you okay?" She held out her arms and Terry stepped into them, and then her tears became sobs. "I'm sorry," Terry said. "I don't." Alice and Ken appeared over Gloria's shoulder. "Terry?" Alice asked. Terry shook her head at her own ridiculousness. "Sorry. I tried to get it all out before I got here, but Andrew got called to report. Physical." "I'm getting you some water," Alice declared. "That's what my mom does when anyone cries." "Sounds good." Terry nodded and Gloria released her. Alice rushed off and disappeared into a corner office area. She returned with a paper cup filled to the brim. The contents sloshed over the sides, but Terry grasped for it. The first sip calmed her. She swallowed, and again. "Better," she said. "Moms know as much as science," Gloria said. Alice watched Terry and added her take. "Science has yet to discover as much of heaven and earth as moms." I come back and Alice is quoting Shakespeare. Ken had gone into the same corner as Alice and emerged carrying a chair. "You sit here," he said, and Terry didn't protest. Foolish, fragile people who had breakdowns on their friends got chairs. That was a rule. "We're sorry about Andrew," Alice said, sweeping her eyes around as Ken and Gloria looked at Terry with sympathy. "It doesn't matter that you knew. It's real now." Terry dipped her chin. "Canada's still an option." Alice's voice was soft. "No, it's not. He won't do it." Terry searched inside herself and grabbed onto the tiny bit of calm. "I'm sorry I derailed the fellowship. Let's get to it. Anyone come up with anything?" Fade agreed to think over the details Alice had provided before they'd been interrupted in the woods. After a long moment in which it looked like the answer would be no, Gloria lifted her hand. "I think maybe we hit the jackpot the other night." She paused. "Or I've lost all touch with reality." Alice perked up. "What do you mean?" "Well," Gloria reached to her side and raised the notebook where she'd been taking notes. "This is at least as scientific as anything the lab is doing, so hear me out." "We're dying to, guys, aren't we?" Alice asked. "Yes." Terry didn't want to get her hopes up, but she found they had a will of their own. "It was one of the first things you said that made me wonder," Gloria said. "That you didn't recognize some of the cars." "Is it fair to say that's unusual?" Alice scoffed. "You could say that. I grew up with guys who treated cars like trading cards. So it seemed odd to me that you didn't recognize more than one." "Do you know how many?" Alice shook her head, frowning. "I don't remember all the details as clearly afterward, that's why I wanted to narrate." "I'm sorry. Is that a deal breaker?" "It's not. Just a data point," Gloria said. "Keep going," Ken said. Gloria did. "So remember Alice went inside and she saw a couple of different things. She described a typewriter with a screen, a plastic disc being put into it, and a giant machine. The little girl was inside. Did I get them all?" Terry still couldn't forecast where this was going, but she was riveted. "Yes, I think so. As far as I can tell, none of those things exist. A couple sound like things predicted at expos and world's fairs, but they haven't been invented." Gloria stopped, as if she'd said the most significant thing. "Am I being dense?" Ken asked. Terry tried to put it together, but Alice beat her to it. "Brenner, the times I've seen him, he's older than he is now," Alice said. "I don't know how I didn't see it before." "I think you're right." Gloria grinned. "Fill in the rest of us," Terry said. "But then the pieces connected." "Really, you think it's the future?" Gloria said. "Alice's visions aren't of now. They are of some point in the future." "When monsters are real?" Ken asked. Alice made a face at him. "Apparently," Gloria said. "The future," Terry repeated. "What do you think, Alice?" Alice shook her head with awe. "I'm going to look at it all completely differently now. But thinking back over everything I've seen, it makes sense. For some values of making sense." Terry sat back against the chair. The solidity of it helped. She took another drink of water. They had an answer, a big one. But the future wasn't a great answer for actually doing something to stop Brenner. The problem had just gotten much bigger. The question is, how do we change the future? That's impossible, isn't it? She slid her gaze to Ken, who she expected to say that's not how things worked. He shrugged. "Some things seem set but others aren't." "Who can say? But it's not like we can go around shouting, the future, Gloria said. "That part only matters to us." "No," Terry said. A certainty came to her. It would matter to someone else. Brenner can never know that Alice sees the future. A part of his future. Gloria put her hand to her throat. Obviously this was a new worry for her. Can you imagine what he'd do? Alice's eyes had gone wide. I don't want to. Roman 2 didn't tell you guys, but that was much more electricity than they give me at the lab. It took that to even begin to see clearly. I can't. Never, Terry said to reassure her. He will never know. And you will never do that again. She paused. But I found those files once. I could go back to his office again and get more evidence. That's all I can think, knowing what we know about the monsters and that he's got some experiment going on kids with powers. We have to keep trying. It's more important than ever now that we stop the experiments. Or, Gloria said. Or Terry asked. Or we could try never going back there. I've got a little experiment of my own underway at school to see how much Brenner will push back. In pretending I want to transfer. I expected him to show up as soon as I put in the paperwork, but so far nothing. Alice had a weirdly hopeful expression as her attention darted among the other three. Terry didn't want to get her hopes up on that account yet. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't stop him, Terry said. Gloria absorbed that. I get it. Trust me. But it'd be good if we had an escape hatch. We don't though, Ken said softly. We don't leave. Not yet. I don't know that much, but I know it's not that easy. He closed his eyes, then opened them. We're all scared. We'd be morons not to be. And we're not morons. Look what Gloria just figured out. We have each other and we shouldn't forget that. We're the best allies we've got. Terry's voice wavered and she hated that. Hated it. But her emotions filled her up and she couldn't keep them inside. They had to spill over. Brenner's not going to let any of us leave without good reason, Alice said. He's not going to give up whatever he's doing with the kids without it either. That's just logical. So we need to create the reason. That means helping Terry get her evidence. But then what? Gloria asked. Terry's heart rose into her throat and her eyes heated. She sipped the water Alice had given her. Well, figure that out, she managed. Maybe we could get a reporter to investigate, to figuring out how to be noble fools, then, Gloria said, raising her hand as if making a toast. Ken let out a breath. The noblest and most foolish, he said. Terry would love to see inside his mind, but no, if anything was becoming increasingly clear, it was that knowing the future didn't fix a damn thing. It's going to be harder this time, the distraction, Terry said. Brenner stays on top of me lately. Alice gnawed her lip. Then, would it make more sense for one of us to try to get to his office? No. Terry rejected it outright. He's already been angry at me. Best to keep that away from you. I have a Polaroid camera now, after all, and I think I might be able to convince Carly to help us. Terry didn't know if that was true after the girls' meltdown last time they talked, but it might help her to have something to do. Terry needed to make her understand that her freedom was in the balance, too. In order to help Carly, she needed Carly to trust her. Terry stood. I have to go home and sleep now or I'll just cry at Brenner all day tomorrow. She paused. Maybe I should stay up all night. He deserves it. But you don't. I'm going to keep looking for things we can use during my sessions. Alice got up and forced Terry into another hug. The tight circle of her arms and the faint smell of grease and sweat from her work clothes was a comfort. Then Ken was there, putting his arms around them both as Alice squirmed. And last, Gloria added her arms gracefully around the very outside of all of them. They swayed a little. Ken said to Terry, "You're stronger than even you know." Terry prayed that he truly was a psychic, and this was one of his certainties. She needed all the strength she could get. The group hug ended when Alice started humming a Beatles song, and they went their separate ways into the night. Terry fell into her narrow dorm bed, waved at Stacy, and went straight to sleep. She dreamed of the forest and being chased through it by Alice's monsters. She woke before she discovered whether she got away. 3. Ken wasn't sure who would answer his knock and how he'd explain being here. But he got lucky. Ken Andrew squinted through the screen door at his parents' house. Had been given his regulation army haircut. "What are you doing here?" His eyes brightened and he looked past Ken toward the car. "Is Terry with you?" "No," Ken said. "I came alone. Terry doesn't know I'm here and keeping it that way would be good. I got your address from Dave." Andrew blinked. Letting the door shut behind him, he stepped outside. "Can I ask we?" "You don't even have to," Ken said. "I'll tell you. Being here was surprisingly hard." The house reminded Ken of his own family's home. He hadn't been there in 3 years. The Riches had the same kind of 2-story house, a wide planked porch with a swing, the same flower beds covered for the winter and tended head lay money by the family matriarch. "You can come in," Andrew said. "My mum will probably fix you something to eat." "I'll take you up on that, but can we stay out here for now?" Ken asked. "I wanted to talk. Be my guest." Andrew gestured to the porch swing. They migrated to it, the swing swaying under their weight. "It feels strange to deliver bad news on a porch swing," Ken said. "So this is that kind of visit then?" Andrew sighed. "I don't know if I believe you're psychic. You here to tell me I don't make it?" Ken put down a foot to stop the swing from moving. "There. No, brother, I don't know about that." Ken paused. "I've tried to see what happens for you and Terry, but all I have is a feeling. She's struggling. Terry's struggling." Andrew sounded skeptical at first, but then he seemed to accept it. "She would hide it from me. What can I do? That's why I'm here." Ken still wasn't sure this was the right thing. "I'm not supposed to interfere, that's what my mother always said." But his mother wasn't always correct. He knew that now. "If it'll help Terry, it's worth a shot. I think you should break up while you're gone. I don't know why, I just have a feeling it might help her somehow." Andrew stayed quiet. "Then you sure you don't want to date her?" "I'm sure." Andrew shook his head. "Well, if I don't come back you have my blessing." "Okay, I'll do it." That's it. Ken had expected an argument, one where he didn't have much to push back with. "I know you care about her. If this will help, sure. It only seems fair. She should be free until we see what happens." "I'd been thinking that already." Ken stared at Andrew's profile, trying as hard as he could to determine the future. But still, it eluded him. A non-existent breeze blew past Terry and the ghostly trees around her cackled, the leaves clattering together like teeth. It didn't help that she could see through them to the cot and the tile floor and her minders. A hand on her shoulder. "Miss Ives," the voice of a demon. His teeth looked too big in his mouth as he spoke to her. "Terry, what's wrong?" "You should know," she said, or thought she said. It was hard to be sure. Today her mind kept circling back to the forest and the monster. Doctor. Brenner in front of her asking her questions didn't help. How long had she been lost in the psychedelic woods, a transparent layer between her and the lab? 4 hours, 5. It made her afraid to close her eyes. She'd been unable to get to the void to see if Carly might be there again, talk to her. The acid made remembering why she needed Carly slippery. The leaves clattered again around her. "Should we give her a sedative?" the orderly asked. "Doctor." Brenner slid his hand down her arm to her pulse. She tried to shrug him off, but he held fast. "Let me go," she demanded. "Now." The slightest hint of a smile in icy blue eyes. "Whoa." Terry's other hand flexed into a fist and she opened her mouth to scream. And then he removed his hand, only to put his stethoscope in ears that seemed pointed, wolfish, and listened to her heart. She flinched as the cold metal moved to her belly. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, and she reached up to push him away. "Relax," Brenner said, stepping back. To the orderly he said, "Her vitals are fine. Pulse racing, but nothing that can't be accounted for by the stress of the hallucinogen." "He means I'm having a bad trip," Terry said to the minion over Brenner's shoulder, and tossed her head from side to side. "I want you to leave me alone." "We'll be here while you ride it out," Brenner said. Was that a note of enjoyment in his voice, or was it her mind playing tricks? Whichever, Terry closed her eyes and, inside, she began to run. She had found a focus, finally. It was not wanting to be anywhere near Dr. Martin Brenner. And eventually she escaped the grim forest and room. The void surrounded her. Her feet splashed through the pool of water she associated with this nowhere-everywhere place. She opened her eyes to the serene dark in all directions. She was breathing hard, still upset. She had grown calmer when Carly appeared in front of her. The girl skipped toward her, splashing through the darkness. This poor child had been through more than Terry could imagine. Sure, Terry's classwork in theory prepared her to deal with children. In practice, at least on acid, coming to talk to Carly after their last conversation felt like walking across a field peppered with landmines while wearing a blindfold. Carly's outburst about Terry having so many friends, and then the fierce hug. She ached for the angry, sweet, lonely girl. Terry tried to hide how relieved she was that Carly was here. She didn't want to spook the girl. "Hello," Carly said. "I asked for a calendar and they gave me one I mark every day, and Thursdays are your days." She said it shyly. Terry bent to be at her level. Carly didn't really seem to like being touched unless it was her idea, so she resisted the urge to smooth the stray hair behind the girl's ear. "Does your calendar have pictures?" Carly gave a little hop. "It has a different animal for every month. February is a tiger." "Tigers have big teeth," Terry said. "Tigers go raw." Carly made a growling noise and prowled around Terry. All of a sudden the girl stopped moving. "My mum used to make that noise and tell me a story about a tiger. I was named after a goddess. She wore a tiger skin and was fierce in battle. So the girl had a mother somewhere." "Where is your mother now?" "Gone." Carly's joy evaporated. She kicked at the water. "Gone, gone, gone." "Mine is too," Terry said. Carly shrugged. "Carly, how long have you been here?" But Terry realized that wasn't the question. "How long have you been with Dr. Brenner?" Still not right. "With Papa, I mean. I didn't have a calendar before." "I don't know. You said they gave you a calendar. Who is they?" "My minders," Carly said. "Papa's helpers." Terry tried to keep her voice steady. "So you stay here. Home for now." Carly shrugged. "Yes, just for now," Terry wanted to say but didn't. "Does Papa ever get mad at you?" Carly nodded. "All the time. He gets so mad," the girl giggled, truly joyous. "Sometimes he gives me candy to make me be good. That's how I got the calendar." Terry didn't want to ask Carly to do anything that might make him mad at her. A terrible thought occurred to her. "Does he hurt you when he's mad?" Carly considered. "Not really. He just lies. I still don't have my friend." She paused. "Other than you. But he swears he'll have one someday soon." So that sounded like a no, which was odd given what Alice had seen him do to the future girl, the way she'd been sent away in punishment. But Carly wasn't prone to lies. The little girl was honest. He must not hurt her, not in that sense. Just in the sense that he's making her live here. Terry decided to go on. "I told you about my other friends the last time I was here. Remember, there's Alice and Ken and Gloria. And he does hurt them us. He makes us take medicine we don't want to. We don't want to come here anymore." "You're going to leave me?" Carly asked. "We want everyone to go." Terry wondered what would seem like a symbol of the outside to a 5-year-old. "Would you like to go to a zoo someday, see a real tiger?" "Yes," Carly said. "I want to meet your friends too." "Someday you can," Terry said. "I want to try to get you out of here. To get all of us out of here." "Papa won't allow it," Carly said. "Maybe we can make him." She said it with care, gauging Carly's reaction. "To help my friends, all of them, including you, I need to go to Papa's office the next time I'm here. Do you think you could come up with a distraction, nothing that would make him too mad? I just need him and everyone else to leave me alone for a few minutes." Carly took this in. She was in no rush to respond. Then, when Terry had nearly given up hope, she said, "I can do it. Papa deserves pranks for the lies he tells." "Yes." Terry couldn't agree more. "He does." Okay, I gotta go. Carly skipped away before Terry could even attempt to hug her. Why did she feel so unsure this would go right? She'd specifically not asked Carly to use her powers because that would make her no better than Brenna. She had a week to worry about whether it would work. For now, she walked back through the void, making soundless splashes. She imagined that phantom tigers lurked in the shadows as she went. 5. They'd been in Hawkins for hours and hours already, and Alice knew soon they'd get to leave. Not soon enough, but she held on to the fact. The electricity was done for today, so she sat on the edge of the cot and waited for the entire marathon day to be over. She'd been more reserved than usual with Dr. Parks, answering her questions with every word chosen carefully. Dr. Parks hadn't seemed to notice. The idea of Brenna knowing what she saw and understanding it had scared Alice to her core, but she'd be strong for Terry, and for the little girl in the future. Alice had glimpsed her again in today's visions. She'd been repeating something back to a pleased Brenna. That had been it, and then her brain took over with a surge of random imagery. She'd pushed herself the other night almost too far. She could feel herself stretched thin, and so today she'd been careful not to press. If only there was some way to tell that girl in the future she wasn't alone, that Alice watched for and suffered for her, that Terry was going to help her, that they all knew about her. But, of course, there wasn't. Dr. Parks had left along with the orderly after a code indigo had been announced over the PA in the here and now. Indigo was a nice word, a nice color. The suggestion and the remaining acid in her system bathed the room in a rich purple-blue hue. When the door opened, Alice expected Dr. Parks to appear and tell her it was time to go. Instead it was a little girl. Not her little girl, though. No, this was the one Terry had described. Somehow Alice hadn't pictured her in a hospital gown identical to the one she wore. The girl was even smaller, younger than the one in Alice's visions of the future. Alice got up from the cot and moved closer to her. Maybe she was hallucinating. Finally. Carly, she squinted. Are you really here? The girl grinned at her. How did you know? Did you just know? Then she shook her head. Terry told you. I was hoping you were like me. Who are you? I'm Alice. She grinned back at the girl, unable not to. This was no mirage or acid-caused vision. She was in Alice's room. How are you supposed to be in here? Nope, Carly sang with glee. I ran away. I wanted to meet Terry's friends. She asked me to make a distraction. Are we friends now, too? Of course we are, Alice said. I thought Terry was asking you to do that next week. That had been the plan. Did it change? The girl rolled her eyes. I'll do it again. Alice had been wondering something. When you make illusions, does it hurt? Nope, Carly said. Well, sometimes my head burns a little. Alice watched as she swiped under her nose as if wiping something away. A little blood comes out. Are you hurt? Alice descended upon her, determined to fix it if so. She muscled her way past short flailing arms and took Carly's jaw to give her nose a closer look. Fat chance of Carly shaking off a grip that had been practiced on a dozen squirming brothers and cousins. I'm not doing it now, Carly said, continuing to resist. And anyway, it's just the cost when it happens. What cost? Carly shrugged her off. That's what Papa says. The cost of illusions. The cost. Alice gaped, then remembered she was the adult here. You shouldn't pay a cost. You're a child. You're a child, Carly countered. You don't know you're normal. Alice put a hand on the girl's arm and held it there when she tried to shake her off. Carly, look at me. I do understand. And I'm not normal. They hook me up to machines here and that pain, that's my cost, the cost for the things I have to see. What things? Carly was interested now. No way Alice was telling her about monsters and tortured little girls. You make illusions, things that aren't there, right? Well, I see things that aren't taking place right here, right now, but are real. You create illusions. I have visions. Oh. Carly gazed at her. Her eyes sparkled. You're like me. I have a friend like me. Are Ken and Gloria like me too? No. Alice felt a pang. But we're all going to help you. Terry won't leave you here. I love you, Alice. We can be tigers. Carly made a roaring face and an attempt at a fearsome noise. Alice had to laugh, even as her heart burned thinking of Brenna hurting this girl. She'd never felt true rage until this moment. Okay, we'll be tigers. She poked Carly's tummy. Right now, though, should you get going back to where you're supposed to be? The girl grabbed her hand and held on. I'll go. Papa can't find me here. You might get in trouble. Carly dropped Alice's hand, then waved and made her way back to the door. She was so small that Alice followed to help her with it. I'm strong, Carly said in protest when Alice tried. She managed it herself. Which only made sense because how else would she have gotten here? Alice liked stubborn girls. I see that. And I'll see you next week. Carly stayed in the gap of the open door for a second longer to declare, I have a calendar. With that, the door closed and the delightful, confusing whirlwind named Carly was gone. 6. Where have you been, Doctor? Brenna demanded as 8 approached the door to her room from the hallway. He gestured for the security officers and other personnel gathered around to back off. Give us a minute. None of your business, she said, with a stubborn set to her chin. He saw how the others looked at 8, practically gawking. He'd have to give them a lecture on professional responses to extreme situations. Like a little girl fooling his staff and getting out of her locked wing. Again. He knew she wasn't visiting Terry, and so he had feared the worst, that 8 had somehow escaped. Her powers made it all too likely she'd try someday and possibly succeed unless he extinguished her desire to. That was why he played nice with her. He hadn't been by to see her in days and had been concerned this was the result. He let his relief sink in. A rare emotion worth indulging. She'd been here the whole time. She wanted his attention. That was all. They weren't there yet to where she used her ability against him. She was only 5 years old, and not savvy enough to even know to want to escape. He should have been confident in his protocols, keeping it that way. Now, he said, when she didn't go on, where were you? I know you didn't go visit Miss Ives because I was in her room when the alert went out. Hiding, 8 said. Where? 8's eyes were brown circles of innocence. Her shrug practiced. Nearby. I wanted to see you. I thought you'd be happy. You did not think I'd be happy that I couldn't find you. She kept looking at him. You didn't even try. He heard a gasp from behind him, one of the people who weren't supposed to be listening. If he found out who it was, they'd be fired. Of course not, Doctor. Brenna said. And for good measure he scooped her up. She softened. I knew you'd come back. Should we get you some ice cream from the cafeteria? The cafeteria had ice cream on hand for all the kids. Children were the easiest to bribe. Their pleasures were simple, their memories short. He'd punish her later when others weren't watching, in a way she'd remember. 8 hesitated. Are we friends? Brenna had no idea what to say. That wasn't her usual question. He answered what he assumed she meant. I'm working on your friend. I promise. Soon. 8 continued looking at him in a way he didn't like. But first, Doctor. Brenna said we should get your ice cream. Yes, Papa. He could tell by the drowsy blink that followed that she'd be asleep before they ever got there. He'd have to do better about stopping in to see her every day, even if he wasn't actually working with her. He'd administer her punishment himself. Then maybe, afterward, she could visit his office. Except he hadn't kept those sketches. The next ones he would keep. Then he could keep her as nearby as he needed to. 7. 3 weeks had passed and February was almost over. Terry had waited in vain for Carly in the void for the past few sessions. There'd been no big distraction besides when Dr. Brenna left her room that last time she had seen Carly. Terry should have gone then, and now they should be planning what their next move was. Instead they were under a perfect sky on an unseasonably warm Saturday indulging Alice in a fun activity. Terry eyeballed the low, sleek, cinna-red version of Alice's usual muscle car. Flecks of gold paint like wings on the windshield. Is this yours, and how are we all going to fit in it? Alice rolled her eyes. Yes, Princess. We will all fit. She gave a forgiving look to Ken and Gloria. Although whoever sits in the back isn't going to have much leg room. It's Terry's trip, Gloria said. She gets the front. Terry doesn't really like cars, Terry reminded everyone. Alice rolled her eyes again. Everyone likes a Firebird except communists. We're going to the brickyard. My uncle got us approved to ride up and see some practice laps. The brickyard was apparently a nickname insiders used for the motor racing track that held the Indy 500. An hour away. Joy. Terry recalled her dad watching it on TV every year. Okay, so maybe you're being a holy terror right now. Knock it off. And this is his car, Ken asked. Terry recalled one of the first things Alice had ever told them. I thought you were going to buy a Firebird for yourself. How much more do you need? I decided to save it just in case, Alice said. Ken touched the toe of his dirty white Converse All-Star to the front tire in lieu of kicking it and bringing down Alice's wrath. This is a long drive. I wish pot did anything for me right now. There will be no marijuana smoking in this car. Alice shook her head. It's practically new. And it's not even mine. It's borrowed. I have to wash it every week for 3 months. Gloria raised her eyebrows. Which you probably volunteered for so you could drive it. Alice looked up at the brilliant blue sky specked with fluffy clouds. Terry took that as confirmation. Her arranging this Saturday expedition was nice, but Terry could have used a nap. Shed developed a theory that Alice's Revelation 8 had been to see her that last time was what prevented her from seeing Carly again. Brenna must have found out. She prayed the girl was all right. And then yesterday Shed gotten the phone call. Andrew was reporting to basic. He'd be coming to say goodbye in 2 days.